fight for the unborn. The Trump administration expands its international ban on abortion funding. President Trump on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers continue to dissect the special counsel's report into collusion. Border battle. The Pentagon will spend $1 billion to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. And a guiding light. How Catholic groups are helping people suffering in Venezuela. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 26, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Trump administration announces a crackdown on international groups that promote or provide abortions. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced today that the United States is expanding the Mexico City policy, which restricts taxpayer dollars from funding abortion. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee talked to the secretary and joins us now from the State Department. What did he say, Wyatt? Good evening.
Good evening, Lauren. The secretary told me it's a move aimed at protecting the sanctity of life. Pro-life groups across the country are praising Secretary Pompeo's announcement, agreeing foreign aid should not be going to subsidize abortions. Pro-lifers also agree with Pompeo's closing a loophole that had provided funds to organizations who didn't promote abortions themselves but gave money to others that do.
Secretary Mike Pompeo holding his most pro-life press conference to date, promising the administration will not support the global abortion industry.
This administration has shown that we can continue to meet our critical global health goals, including providing health care for women, while refusing to subsidize the killing of unborn babies.
Pompeo promising stricter enforcement of the Mexico City policy. The law was first established by President Reagan in 1984. It says that in order to qualify for U.S. foreign funding, international groups have to certify they won't perform or promote abortion. President Trump expanded the policy in 2017 to apply to more global health programs. Critics, however, have called the Mexico City policy a global gag rule. I asked the secretary what he thought of that description.
What is the problem with describing it as this, and do you take exception to that description?
That's silly. This is a policy that is designed fundamentally to protect human beings. It's not the policy we're arguing about. We're talking about human lives. It's deeply consistent with the most moral behavior of governments.
Pompeo also says he's proud to serve in an administration that protects the least among us. The secretary voiced concern about one group in particular, the Organization of American States, or OAS. The OAS promotes conversation about countries in the Americas on issues like human rights and democracy. But Pompeo says a wing of the group is advocating for abortion.
The institutions of the OAS should be focused on addressing crises in Cuba, Nicaragua, and in Venezuela, not in advancing the pro-abortion cause.
The United States spends about $9 billion a year to support global health programs. Now, some critics of the Mexico City policy say the administration's announcement will hamper reproductive and maternal health care in developing nations. Secretary Pompeo says the administration will make sure the U.S. remains the leader in foreign aid, including health care, but he says health care doesn't include abortion. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. President Donald Trump took a victory lap on Capitol Hill this afternoon. The special counsel's 2-year investigation found no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. But Democrats are demanding Attorney General William Barr turn over the full report in 1 week. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us now. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Speaker Nancy Pelosi urged Democrats behind closed doors to be calm. The special counsel, in his words, says the investigation did not establish coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now the president's going on offense against those who said he colluded with that country.
This should never happen to a president again.
The president huddles with Senate Republicans.
The Mueller report was great. It could not have been better. It said no obstruction, no collusion. It could not have been better.
As the GOP celebrates the end of special counsel Mueller's investigation.
That we spent 22 months, $25 million, 40 FBI agents, 19 attorneys, went to 13 foreign countries, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 witnesses. and no collusion. I do believe he's owed an apology.
So I asked. After this 2-year investigation, it said, no, there's no collusion. Do you owe an apology to the president, do you think?
There clearly is evidence of collusion. The special counsel is not prosecuting because there is less than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Very high standard doesn't mean there's no evidence.
House Republicans fire back.
Because he didn't just find insufficient evidence of collusion or conspiracy, he said there was no evidence.
Now lawmakers on both sides say it's time to move to other issues.
My suggestion to the president and to all sides, both Democrats and Republicans, is don't be a meathead. It's over.
And one place House Democratic leaders don't want to touch is the I word.
We didn't run on impeachment. We didn't win the House of Representatives on impeachment. We're not focused on impeachment.
And the president agrees. He says he doesn't think Democrats are talking about impeachment. What they are talking about is getting the full Mueller report. 6 House chairmen asked the Attorney General to hand it over by April 2nd. Lauren?
Jason, from what you're hearing, will lawmakers be, what did he say, meatheads and drop this or not drop this?
Well, they do have a lot on their agenda every single day. We're seeing lots of hearings, votes. For example, the House today failed in its vote to override President Trump's first veto. That means his border emergency declaration stays put. Now, President Trump here at the Capitol said the GOP will soon be known as the party of health care. And today, Democrats rolled out their own health care bill.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Joining me now is pro-life Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona and a member of the House Freedom Caucus. Congressman Biggs, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks, Lauren. Good to be with you.
You agree that Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report completely exonerates President Trump, and you're calling for as much transparency as possible. Do you think the full report should be released, and what do you think that could tell us?
Well, I would like the full report to be released, but I also recognize that there's some statutes on the book that constrain Attorney General Barr. So if there's grand jury transcripts, he's probably bound to keep those redacted. If there's some kind of other investigation, we know that some stuff was given to the Southern District of New York. There might be an ongoing investigation. He can't do that. And if there's something that's classified, he can't do that. But barring that, everything should come out. And I do even get a little leery about that, because when we got documents before, we'd be told, this is for national security purposes that we're redacting this, and we'd find out from oral testimonies we were going through that wasn't the case, that it really was being done for embarrassment purposes. People were embarrassed that there was some corruption at the top of the levels, top levels of the FBI or DOJ. So I hope we get something out, and I think if we got something out, it might put to bed all of this. We just heard a Democrat on your segment say, well, yeah, there's evidence of collusion. No, that's not what the summary said. The summary said there's no evidence. So if the more we get out, the more transparent we are, the more likely we can get over this hurdle and move on to more substantive things that would help this country move forward.
You're calling for the prosecution of former FBI Director James Comey. Why do you believe Comey violated the law?
Well, he did a couple of things that we know were certainly potentially violative. So here's one to think of. He supposedly leaked classified information. Well, that in and of itself is a crime. So he leaked it for the purposes of manipulating us into getting into this whole investigation and getting a special counsel appointed in the first place. He gave it to a buddy from Columbia, who then was instructed basically to give it to the media, and away we go on it. Additionally, he's the guy that may have violated laws with regard to Hillary Clinton, and there may be some corruption that went on there.
But how is this moving on, Congressman? How would this be moving on if we continue down this road?
Well, if you really want to move on, then you have to get to the truth of things. So that's why I say let's be transparent on the Trump the Mueller investigation, which we know ultimately what the findings are. But let's get to the transparency of that. But let's also get to the people who caused us to get down this road, because it isn't just that he was exonerated. It's that there was no evidence at all. And if there's no evidence at all, and we know that Rosenstein's going in saying, hey, I'll wear a wire because the case was so weak, you really need to get to the bottom of those people who corrupted the government. That's the problem.
I'd like to move on with the remaining time that we have. As a pro-life member of Congress, what is your reaction today to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announcing to the press that he is going to enforce and expand the Mexico City policy? I actually have a statement from you from 2017 here that says, when they did reinstate it, that you said, "I hope this action will be the first of many." Well, I think it is. I think your wish came true.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump up and down and shout, because one of the holes that was there is that we might give money to an organization that overtly doesn't perform abortions themselves, but then they would transfer money to a sister organization or some friendly organization that did provide abortions. So I'm really grateful for this, because Pompeo said he's going to close that loophole. That's a critical loophole to be closed, and it's going to preserve and protect life around this country.
Congressman Andy Biggs and the world. Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona. Thanks, sir, for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren.
Kellyanne Conway blasts Democrats for the incessant investigations of President Donald Trump, but she tells News Nightly the White House is still ready to work with Democrats on important policy issues.
We'll just continue to do what we're doing. We're working on infrastructure here. We're working on healthcare. We're working on so many things. Trade, obviously, with or without the Democrats. He's the president of the entire country. We have to, quote, move forward on all of this.
The counselor to the president also blames the media for repeating many of the false claims made by Democrats. The Justice Department says the entire Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, should be struck down. In a filing last night, the DOJ says it agrees with a federal judge in Texas who invalidated the Obama-era health care law. It's a shift from when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General. Then the Trump administration called for only parts of the law to be replaced. Nearly 24 Australian reporters and a dozen media organizations are accused of breaking a gag order for reporting on the conviction of Cardinal George Pell. The Vatican's former treasurer was found guilty of sexual abuse. While the ruling was reached in December, the judge banned any reporting on it until this month. The journalists are going to appear in court in April. Some of Australia's highest-profile journalists could face prison sentences. A pastor in China has been in jail since December, charged with inciting subversion. Also behind bars, his wife and about 10 other members of the Early Rain Covenant Church. The pastor's church has been closed, and some of its members are in hiding or on house arrest. Others have been thrown out of the country. For more on this story, including what the pastor said about religious freedom in the communist country soon before he was arrested, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The Vatican official who negotiated a landmark deal with China over the appointment of bishops says the process began 4 decades ago. Archbishop Claudio Maria Celli says it will be a long time before the 12 million Catholics there can have a normal life. Catholics are split between an underground church loyal to the Pope and a government-backed one. And the founder of the Vatican's women's magazine has quit, as has the publication's all-female editorial board. Founder Lucrezia Scarafia says church leaders were on a campaign to discredit the magazine, especially after it denounced the sexual abuse of nuns by clergy. The editor-in-chief of Vatican newspapers says he granted the women total freedom and wishes Scarafia well. Coming up on our broadcast, Representative Dan Crenshaw tells me his reaction to the money going to the border wall. Stay with us. House Democrats failed to override President Trump's veto regarding a national emergency at the border. And the Pentagon says it has approved the transfer of $1 billion to build a wall on the border. It would lead to 57 miles of fencing and road improvements. The wall would reach 18 feet high. Defense officials say any projects that lose funding this year to pay for the wall might receive funding next year. Democrats oppose the plan and the redirecting of funds. My next guest, a former Navy SEAL and congressman from a border state, says President Trump is correct. There is an emergency at the southern border, and he supports the construction of a wall. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Congressman Dan Crenshaw, Republican from Texas. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
The Department of Defense says that shifting $1 billion from a military personnel account is going to happen. They're going to build a 57-mile fence at the southern U.S. border, and they're claiming it won't interfere with military readiness. Do you think that this will be an effective way to help fund it?
Well, it's the only way that the president was given a chance and a choice to fund it, because Congress wouldn't do its job. And I've been very vocal about this. Congress should have appropriated the money that Homeland Security asked for. All right, it was $5.7 billion. That number was based on expert analysis. It was based on years of observing where we have the highest amount of crossings and where we need the infrastructure. Congress refused to acknowledge that. And what the president did was declare a national emergency. We do have an emergency. Just today it was reported that we had more crossings per day than any time in the last 13 years, I believe. We had almost 80,000 people crossing illegally just last month. These are enormous, enormous numbers. Our resources are completely strained. We have no place to house everyone coming across. Our asylum process is being completely taken advantage of. They're using this as a mechanism to traffic drugs and people across. Children are being trafficked across because they're being used as a token for illegals to cross. This is indeed an emergency, and the president's absolutely right. And we need to fund infrastructure on the wall to help our Border Patrol agents do their job.
You joined other members of the Homeland Security Committee, including Senator Martha McSally, to introduce legislation that would give U.S. Customs and Border Protection the authority to waive the polygraph test for police officers and active duty troops, as well as reservists and vets. How much of an impact do you think this is going to have on border agent staffing? And isn't there a risk in doing this?
I'd say the risk is very minimal. It'll definitely have a positive impact. The polygraph examination is one of the most arduous portions of the entire process when we're talking about hiring border agents. There's about 11 steps to that process, and the polygraph could definitely be one that is made easier. There isn't risk, in my opinion, because I think people misunderstand what a polygraph can actually be used for. It cannot be used as a crystal ball. You can't predict somebody's behavior with a polygraph. You can use it as a interrogation tool to try and assess whether, or not assess, but actually get someone to tell you a truth. But it's pretty unreasonable to think that you'd be able to tell whether border agents will be corrupt based on them passing a polygraph or not.
For those in our audience who don't know you, you were a Navy SEAL for 10 years. On your third of 5 overseas deployments, you were hit by an IED. You lost sight completely and regained it in your left eye. You deployed twice more. You've earned 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart. Now you have a master's in public administration from Harvard. And just the other day, you're being called a rare breed in the Washington Examiner, unafraid of going against the president. Last week you tweeted at the president, quote, "There's just no reason to be talking about Senator McCain after he has passed. He is not your political enemy, Mr. President." Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I'd say it's pretty fair. For one thing, what I caution people who want to criticize the president on is you don't need to insult him. He's doing overall a very good job, and overall I definitely support the president. It doesn't mean that we can't disagree sometimes. We've disagreed respectfully over Syria. And the possibility of removing more troops from Afghanistan as well. And you know what? The president listens. The reason I spoke out on the issue with John McCain was because John McCain is really not around to defend himself. He used to be around to defend himself, and him and the president could get into that discussion, but he's no longer here, and I think it's inappropriate to bring him up.
Congressman Dan Crenshaw, Republican from Texas, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your views, and we hope you come back.
Thank you.
A federal judge in Kentucky tells lawyers to watch their language in an upcoming abortion case. The state's last abortion clinic filed a lawsuit against 2 pro-life laws, and the judge has warned both sides to avoid intemperate language. The initial hearing is set for Friday. Up next, a first-hand account of daily life during the political crisis in Venezuela, and why Pope Francis visited Rome's City Hall. Second power outage hit much of Venezuela yesterday, causing more chaos in the politically charged country. As during the outage 2 weeks ago, the government of President Nicolas Maduro is blaming the U.S. for sabotaging its electrical grid. As Venezuela's economic and political crises deepen, many seem resigned to continuous disruption in their daily routine. Joining us now from Rome is Alessandro Monteduro, Director of Aid to the Church in Need in Italy. You just returned from Venezuela. We've seen horrible pictures coming out of that country. Tell us what you saw.
Nice to be with you, first of all. I stayed in Venezuela a few days ago, and the situation I found, it's surreal, Dantesque, apocalyptic. I never imagined it was possible to find this situation. I had arriving my first meeting with Cardinal Baltasar Porras, and he said to me, Venezuela is like Syria. I have to say, I didn't think it was possible. It wasn't my impression, but at the same time, after 6 days in which I stayed there, I have to say it was the truth, because a country in which people don't have medicines, food, water, electric energies, how is it possible to describe? We are talking of the same effects of a conflict, civil war like Syria.
On your trip, you worked with the church, and the bishops have spoken out against Maduro. Has that impacted the church's ability, your organization's ability to provide aid?
I can say Venezuela is, from this point of view, wonderful, because I spotted the beauty of the church. Because now church is the only institution about for who the people have still trust. I spotted not only the right care for the pastoral activity, but also the support for the people, for the faithfuls, without any possibility to have a meal during the day. And so, for instance, the solidarity pots in each parish, every day there is possibility by the church to organize the way to give satisfaction, to give food, to give meal at all the faithfuls. It's the beauty of the church.
President Nicolas Maduro asked the Vatican to mediate the crisis, and according to reports, Pope Francis said no. What role do you think the church should play in Venezuela?
I don't have an answer from this point of view, and first of all, isn't my responsibility. But I can say, for the church now, the priority is the democracy and the people, as you can understand. And so now church is engaged in the humanitarian approach with Caritas and with all the agencies, humanitarian agencies. We are making what is possible to make, but at the same time with a lot of obstacles. Isn't easy at the moment in which your first competitor, your first obstacle is the government. For us it's very difficult. It's a new crisis, it's a long crisis in which isn't possible now also for the NGO to organize the best work to help people. About Vatican, I know Secretary of State and the Nuncio, they are making all the things possible also about diplomatic activity, but obviously isn't only responsibility of the Vatican State.
Alessandro Monteduro, Director of Aid to the Church in Need in Italy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Former White House strategist Steve Bannon lashes out at Pope Francis, saying the Holy Father should focus on fixing the sex abuse crisis in the church and stay out of politics.
We should start to focus on the metastasizing cancer in the Catholic Church, or we're not going to have an apparatus of the Catholic Church because it's going to be financially liquidated.
Bannon, who is Catholic, made the comments at a press conference in Rome today. He is in Italy working to unite nationalist voters ahead of the European Parliament elections in May. Pope Francis crossed the Tiber River this morning for his first visit to Rome's City Hall. Mayor Virginia Raggi welcomed the Holy Father. The Pope paid homage to the Eternal City, which he said has welcomed people from all over the world for almost 2,800 years, and he warned of degradation. Rome is struggling with problems of garbage removal and potholed streets and decay. The Holy Father urged the mayor and her staff to do their share to make the Italian capital, quote, more beautiful and livable for all. Finally tonight, Pope Francis makes a surprise appearance at one of the pontifical universities in Rome. He led the Lenten meditation and then warned it's a dangerous time, marked with a comfortable and stingy individualism where we are concerned about our own well-being. He says the church can provide a healthy perspective. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.